Hello and welcome to Fantasy View with me, Jason Hubbard. Here I review fantasy novels to let you know what to read if it catches your fancy, and I'll let you know about the books I wrote myself. Well, damn it. I guess I should have known better. I'm not even sure if I should be doing this. This just doesn't feel right. That's because I didn't get this book from a store, nor did I download it on my Kindle. No, I got this right from the author herself at a comic convention at the Las Vegas Convention Center. She's an indie writer like myself, and I thought I could help her out by giving her book a good review. And yet, at the back of my mind, I considered the possibility that it was going to be pretty bad, so making a podcast review would be uncomfortable. I had been burned before by indie books that were bad either from poor editing or bland storytelling. So yeah, I'm going to give some crap to an indie author whom I came face to face to. At least I didn't give her my address. At least, I don't think I did. Oh shit! The book is called The Demon Hunter Saga by Cynthia Vesper. It's called a saga because it's 3 books that were previously sold separately, now in one volume. What a deal, right? Except that the whole thing is only about 400 pages with pretty big typeface, so it's not as long as all that. The story is about a young man named Costa Calabrese. He's an indentured servant to an ornery tavern owner who likes to beat him up whenever Costa doesn't follow the rules. In his free time, he likes to go into the woods and imagine he's on an adventure with his good friend Tuck. One day, he and Tuck witness the slaying of a man who might not have been a man at all. The killer is a man named Kane Coleridge, who turns out to be a world-famous demon hunter who's been hanging around the town lately. Kane knew he was being watched, and he takes a shine to Costa. He buys the boy's wages to take him under his wing, and he shows Costa the first, if meager, step to becoming a demon hunter. Costa is reluctant at first, but he then sees this as his way to the kind of adventure he's always dreamed of having. Fast forward a bit, and Costa is now under the tutelage of one Weapon Master Talos, who has an entire school for weapons training. There is, of course, the standard cocky popular student who gives our hero shit on day one. Here, he's an elf named Perle. And there's the standard, lovely, and mysterious young woman who turns out to be the teacher's daughter, here named Talisa. Costa starts his schooling being cocky and arrogant because he's just gone through a traumatic experience and he wants to set things right as soon as he can. But after 1 year, which the book doesn't bother to cover, only then does he become a warrior who's perfectly capable of handling all sorts of monsters and demons. Oh, and it turns out he's some kind of chosen one, because he's a special snowflake, don't you know? As you can tell, the story is pretty generic, especially in the beginning. Of course, it is hard to be original these days, so you can be unoriginal and still get away with it. But being unoriginal is one thing, being uninspired is another. This book has a number of problems, so where to begin? Well, let's start at what I believe is the root of these problems, the minimalist storytelling. I may have said in some previous reviews that an author uses a minimalist writing style or storytelling style or whatever. Man, I must have been so young and naive back then, with a head full of peach fuzz and a bare bottom as pink as Gwen Stefani's lipstick. The author of A Demon Hunter tells her story at a speedy pace, skipping many details in order to get to the good part, which is something many movies and video games also do. The result is a book that lacks immersion. Characterization falls flat from being so generic, and action scenes aren't nearly as thrilling as they ought to be. While reading this book, I got the sense that I was reading a story that was originally meant to be a movie. You know how in many action-adventure movies, we simply go from one seemingly important moment to the next, and the actors seem to be in a hurry, so their dialogue is stilted and flat? I recently saw a movie like this called Snow White and the Huntsman, which is visually arresting but ultimately a downer. Demon Hunter is told in similar fashion, making for a story that suffers from its quick pace. Throughout the story, Costa and his friends face a variety of monsters, such as vampires and shapeshifters, and some of these battles are personal, while others are simply contracts he takes out. Many of these battles, thanks to the minimalist storytelling, are not very exciting, especially since they occur so quickly and lack depth. I mean, in a novel, the author isn't supposed to describe every swing of a sword or pull of a trigger, but they shouldn't lack any kind of emotional punch either. And yet, that's what your typical demon hunter battle is like. I suppose this isn't always the case. There's a battle with gargoyles with some suspense, even though it ends unrealistically, and there's one with a giant snake that's also half decent. But then you have battles with an ogre, which is barely given any description, and giant wolves, which are dispatched without any kind of special trick. Speaking of which, many of the monsters are taken out so easily and quickly that you may wonder why Costa needed to be the one to dispatch them. It's not like he has special powers or anything, he's just well practiced and has a sword and a crossbow. Is he truly a peerless warrior, or are those who contract him simply incompetent? The romance subplot especially suffers from the minimalist storytelling. It is almost a case of, hey, you're here, I'm here, let's bone. I say almost because it's really a case of the author pulling the wool over your eyes and saying, time passed, and the relationship between this man and woman developed. You're just gonna have to trust me on this. This romance is extremely simple. Costa and Talisa meet by a fountain at the weapons school, then they go on a mission to beat some monsters atop a mountain where she shows interest in him, and then in the second installment of the saga, which happens some years after the first installment, they start boning. Now, I know what some listeners may be thinking. These are two young whippersnappers who've made it their business to hunt and kill monsters. If they want to have a little fun in their downtime, then what's the big deal? As long as I get aroused while reading about their boning, then this book has done its job. I just might agree with that, but during the love scenes, the main character, which the book is narrated by, says things like, "She trusted me to give myself to her. I had not known such an intense and euphoric feeling in all my days. All of her captivated my heart. And this moment we would not soon forget, and I intended it to be special." Such statements like these, whether you think they're corny or not, practically demand for there to be a sense of chemistry. Sure, they're physically attracted to each other, but how do they complement each other through conversations, laughter, battle training, personalities? There's very little of that going on. The narrator says he's in love, but I don't entirely buy that, not if I haven't read how his relationship developed. Another argument for how I'm blowing smoke at my ass is that this is a story about a guy who's really good at killing monsters and demons. The romance story should be of little concern. It should simply be an afterthought. I might agree with that, if not for how the romance story becomes more important as the book goes on, especially in the saga's third installment, which is barely 60 pages long. The romance is a pretty important factor by this point, but even then I found it hard to care because the romance has such a weak foundation. Finally, this book should have spent more time in the editing phase. Missing commas are a common problem, leading to run-on sentences that could have confused my brain if I wasn't confused already. It's ironic because in my own writing I'm trying not to use commas so much so my paragraphs can be read more smoothly. Still, a run-on sentence is what it is, and it could be fixed by just one tiny little mark. I also remember the author misspelling the word peak 2 times, and one other word which I can't remember. If that sounds like a petty complaint, it's because it is. Ha! In conclusion, the Demon Hunter Saga is simply lousy. At best, it's an epic story which is a quick read. At worst, it's incredibly half-assed, which in my book means is very unsatisfying. In her bio, the author says that she's a screenwriter, among other things. I don't know what movies or TV shows she wrote for, but the fact that she's a screenwriter is very telling. As I said, the story plays out like it's a movie, and it's very lacking in detail, as if the author didn't want to bother with them because that's what production designers are for. Yeah, well, if an author writes a book with the intent on turning it into a movie someday, they should learn to make the book an immersive experience first, not just a stand-in for a screenplay later. I'm Jason Hubbard. Thanks for listening to Fantasy View, and please, keep reading.